The four therapists in the Office of Work Life, and today we're going to do a presentation that addresses emotional health titled "You're Okay When Everything Is Not Okay." So our points of emphasis, we're going to define what emotions are and what constitutes as emotional health. We're going to specifically spend some time focusing on workplace relationships, or at least how emotional health is relevant to workplace environments. We're going to identify what are the foundations for emotional health. We're also going to explore strategies to responding to difficult emotions. And we're going to give some opportunities for some skill building at the end. So let's open just with this kind of basic question of what are emotions. And here I provided a definition that I think may be different than what a lot of people think of when they hear the word emotion. I think a lot of times that word conjures up affect, is what we would call it within like the realm of psychology. But they talk about emotions as our feelings, as our emotional feelings. But I encourage you to think of emotions as in a much broader sense, that emotions are actually bundles of thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations. And the reason why I think this is helpful is because our thoughts and our feelings and our physical sensations are very intertwined. And often if we can change our relationship to our thoughts, or we can relate to our feelings in a different way, or we can become aware of our physical sensations and relate to our physical sensations differently, that changes our overall kind of experience of emotion as well as our capacity to respond. I also make the point that emotions, they really serve an evolutionary purpose. And what do I mean by this? I mean that our brain is really hardwired to look for danger in our environment, all right? So if you think about some of the strongest emotions, fear would be right there at the top of the list. And this has been helpful for human beings, over millions of years, because it's allowed us to scan our environment for danger, to look out for danger, to try to plan and prepare. However, this high sense of fear can often create psychological problems when there is no actual threat present. The other equally important aspect of emotion is that this is what bonds us together. What forms human bonds. It's what makes us part of a community, is that connection of a feeling of love and togetherness and care, and that emotions are kind of like the glue that keep us together, which also has been essential to our survival. So when we think about emotional health, here are 3 key points I like to kind of use to define what is emotional health. First of all, it's an awareness of our emotions. So we start with this place of awareness, just knowing what we are feeling when we're feeling it. Awareness of our emotions that provides us insight into ourselves. So this awareness of what we're feeling, this awareness of what our thoughts are, our physical sensations and experiences, this awareness is a key part of emotional health. Second, emotional health is the ability to experience a range of emotions without becoming overwhelmed or emotionally reactive. Now, let me just say this. Every human being has times in their life where they feel overwhelmed. And we all have plenty of times in our days where we are emotionally reactive. But the greater our capacity is to hold and experience a range of emotions without becoming overwhelmed, that's another way of kind of conceptualizing resiliency, to be able to hold difficult emotions, to encounter stress and not feel overwhelmed. Our capacity to respond instead of just being emotionally reactive to situations and to what we're feeling and what we're knowing, this capacity to respond instead of being reactive really speaks to the capacity for human freedom. And so these are key aspects of emotional health. And then finally, emotional health is building a relationship with emotions that empowers us to act and make decisions that are consistent with our values. And so in this point, I want to really emphasize is about building a relationship with our emotions, or in some cases, transforming or changing the relationship with our emotions. Ultimately, so that we can make decisions that are consistent with our values. Okay, so when we think about a workplace environment, we have here on the left, we have examples within a workplace setting of how emotion can really facilitate a positive work environment. So emotions can provide meaning and purpose. When you look at research around people that really enjoy the work that they do, they often find great meaning they find meaning either in the work relationships or the work itself. Ideally, they find meaning in both the work relationships and the work. Emotions can also generate bonding within the team and help facilitate teamwork. So positive emotions create a positive team environment, collaboration, people looking out for each other, people listening to each other. Positive emotion within the work environment can lead to creativity, to innovation, and to problem solving. And ultimately, when there is this positive emotion within work environments, there is greater capacity to accomplish goals. On the right side, what we see is how negative affect, negative thinking, negative experiences can create problems in a work environment. And so when there are negative emotions present, this can create feelings of alienation and dissatisfaction with the work. I would also add to that just feelings of either burnout or feeling overly overwhelmed by stress. Negative emotions can create interpersonal conflicts within the work environment. It can lead to stagnation where people are unwilling to take risks or try new things. These negative interpersonal conflicts and these feelings of dissatisfaction or low motivation in itself can create more problems. And ultimately, negative emotions within a work environment can block goal achievement. So let's just pause for a minute and think about what are the basic foundations for emotional health. When I meet with clients as one of the 4 therapists in the Office of Work Life, and somebody presents with anxiety or stress or some depression, one of my first areas that I always assess is their sleep. We know that there is an epidemic within American society, a sleep deprivation epidemic. Most people do not get enough sleep. So just for the record, less than 7 hours per night is considered sleep deprivation. And so both quantity and quality matter. If you're not getting enough sleep or you're not getting enough quality sleep, this is going to make it really difficult to kind of regulate your emotions and to manage difficult emotions. So sleep is very important. Movement. We know that as human beings, for most of our existence, we did not live sedentary lifestyles. Yet today, most of us spend, long hours sitting at a desk or, sitting when we're off work. Lack of movement, lack of opportunities for movement can also be negative for our emotional health. In terms of nutrition, nutrition is what I'm thinking about here is mainly opportunities to eat healthy, non-processed foods. But one of the things that always stands out to me when I think about nutrition is that if your body is hungry, it experiences that hunger like a threat, just like it would if you saw somebody threatening you with violence. So in other words, if you're very hungry, your body is starting to go into fight or flight mode because it feels under threat. And then finally, for emotional health, in addition to sleep and movement and nutrition, we know that we need relaxation. And embedded in relaxation, it consists of both having downtime, where you're not having to constantly be working towards goal achievement, but it also means opportunities for play. There's a real strong correlation that the more somebody is able to play throughout their day, the better their emotional health is. Other foundations for emotional health include the idea of being present with your experience instead of living in autopilot. So what do I mean by presence? I mean awareness, knowing what you're thinking, knowing what you're feeling, knowing what your physical body is experiencing. Your attention is on the present moment, whereas autopilot is where you're kind of going through the motions. You're probably deep in your thoughts. It's not connected to your present moment experience, and it's not connected to what your body is experiencing. So the more we can cultivate presence, the more we can enhance our emotional health. There's a study that I like to cite, which is really interesting, where they would monitor how often people's mind daydreams, essentially, how often their mind wanders from the present moment, either thinking about the past or thinking about something in the future, or defaulting back to some self-assessment about how am I doing, some kind of self-evaluation. What am I doing with my life? How are my relationships going? What kind of person am I? So when they've done these studies, what they found is that on average, people's mind wanders away from the present about 47% of the time. Approximately about half the time, our mind is wandering away from the present. Well, what's really interesting is that the people who mind wanders away less often, in other words, people whose mind is present in what they're doing, they tend to be less stressed and happier. Another foundation for emotional health is just this practice of bringing awareness and acceptance to what you're feeling, to what you're thinking, to what your experience is. I put in parentheses the difference between conscious and unconscious experience. So often we have either thoughts kind of running in the background of our minds, or we have feelings, affect. We might feel grumpy, or we might feel irritable, again, operating in the background. We may have physical discomfort. Many of us go long periods of time with tension in our bodies, in our necks, and our backs. When we are unconscious or unaware of these experiences, we're much more likely to be reactive to them. So if I am having negative self-talk about I'm failing at my job, or I'm not a good enough parent, or if I'm having negative self-talk about, man, I can't stand my coworker, or my supervisor is the worst. If I am experiencing frustration or anxiety, if I have tension in my body and I'm unaware of this, I'm much more likely to lash out at people, to lose my patience, to be unable to take the perspective of others and consider other people's points of view. But once I bring to my awareness what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, I can say to myself, okay, I know what this is. I'm experiencing some anxiety right now. Or I know what this is. I'm worried that I am not performing good enough at my job. In that very moment that you bring awareness to your experience, those unconscious states lose a lot of the power they have over you. You're then able to kind of make decisions where you're able to more respond in a way that is informed by what your experience is, and is not just driven by some kind of unconscious experience that you are not able to make meaningful in that moment. So 2 things I put in here. These are 2 statements that can help you remember the importance of bringing awareness to what you're feeling and thinking and what your body's experience is what we feel we can heal. So we know that when people are experiencing a lot of anxiety or depression, or if they're experiencing grief, the tendency is we want to avoid these experiences because they're uncomfortable. Avoid these experiences, there's a second statement, what we resist this. So in other words, in order to kind of allow ourselves to let to let emotion run through us, we have to actually be present with it. We have to engage with that discomfort. Otherwise, we can get stuck in it and can kind of just always be present in the background. Other foundations for emotional health just include self-empowerment. And so what do I mean by this? So one of the things is that we use I language, that you say, you know, I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling criticized, or I'm feeling judged, or feeling like too much is being asked of me. When we use I language, then all of a sudden we're able to speak truth to our experience. And this gives us power. Just acknowledging what we say, or just acknowledging what we're feeling, that right there often alleviates some of the discomfort. And so, and when we are working with coworkers, it's really important that instead of saying, you know, you messed up at this, or, you know, you're not listening to me, which puts people on a defensive when you use that you language, to use your own I language, that, you know, I feel unheard. You know, if you share that, people are more receptive to that type of feedback. Another aspect of empowerment is to recognize that what we think and what we feel, it's real, but it doesn't mean it's true. So often we have thoughts that are based on some kind of core beliefs that we're not good enough, or that we're failing, or that other people are judging us, or people don't like us. Doesn't mean it's true. It's real because we're thinking it and it impacts us, but it doesn't mean it's true. The same thing with our feelings. We may have the feeling that something bad is about to happen, that, you know, that our supervisor is disappointed in us, or that the work project that we're spending a lot of time on is not going to turn out well. You may have that feeling, but it doesn't mean it's true. And so just reminding yourself that our thoughts, our feelings, they're real, but it doesn't mean they're true. They're real, but not true, allows us to create some space and say, to acknowledge what we're experiencing, but also say, is this the truth? Is there another way of looking at this? Is there something I'm not considering? It empowers you to have the capacity to not just react with old stories or beliefs that you've thought a million times before. Another aspect of empowerment, and I was just giving this as an example, is mindfulness in terms of responding and not reacting. And this is true in any kind of social interaction. It's really important within a work environment. We often can fall into these feelings or these thoughts that a coworker doesn't like us, or they're out to get us, or that, you know, my opinion doesn't matter, or that I'm not competent. And when that stuff is operating kind of in the backdrop of our interactions, then it kind of defeats or creates a barrier to our capacity to actually contribute to our team, and to acknowledge, you know, that what we're thinking in our head doesn't mean it's true. Finally, a really important foundation for emotional health is this idea of human connection and belonging. We know that when we are going through a difficult time and we talk to someone who's a friend or a family member, that our body releases oxytocin. It's a stress hormone that makes us feel better. It's a bonding hormone. We know that when we reach out to others, people that can listen to us, that we feel better. We also know that when we're able to find communities of people, or groups of people, or friends or families, when we feel a sense of belonging, that our emotional health is better. And all these things kind of tie into this kind of bigger life goal of living an authentic life. And what I mean by this is knowing what is most important to you, knowing what your values are, and trying to live life in a way that's consistent with your values. Another aspect of authentic living is knowing where are my talents, what are my strengths, what are my interests, and pursuing things in your life that allow you to realize your talents, but also that challenge you. So when you know your values and you're able to intentionally create positive flow states, you're able to live in a way that's consistent with who you are as a person. This final bullet point on foundations for emotional health is the idea of building in time within your day to just be open to your experience. We call this being mode, or just being, where you're not trying to fix something or solve a problem. You're not trying to work towards a goal. You're just open to what you're thinking, to what you're feeling. You're open to what your body is feeling. You're open to what people within your environment are communicating. The doing mode is where we are most of the time when we're at work. And this is where we're very analytical and we're trying to solve problems. But even within a work environment, whether it's a traditional work environment where you're in a work office, or most of us these days, or many of us these days are teleworking, creating some downtime where you don't constantly have to be solving a problem, where you can go outside and you can actually just, like, today is a great day for, like, just admiring the blue skies, for feeling the sun on our face, or if we go for a walk, feeling the movement when we go on a walk. If we're home and our children are there, or we have pets around, taking a few moments just to appreciate our pets and our children. This is being mode, and why it's important is because it allows us to kind of rejuvenate, to nurture ourselves. When we just try to grind through the day after day, we get depleted, we get frustrated, and we actually become more or less efficient in our work, less creative. So being mode, creating time to just allow yourself to experience and appreciate your life, to engage with your life without trying to work towards a goal, is very important. All right, so that's the back. What helps with emotion to live a life that's characterized by emotional health. Now I'd like to just talk a little bit about what happens when we get tangled or stuck, what I call stuck in the muck. When we get stuck in the muck of, like, negative emotion. So first of all, there's this part of being a human being is that there's a strong negativity bias. And what I mean by that is we tend to focus on what's going wrong or things that bother us, whereas we tend to minimize the things that are going well or the things we enjoy. If we receive criticism or we have a negative experience, we hold on to that. It has more impact on us than a lot of the positive experiences we have. Again, from an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense because it allows us to focus on potential danger. But the negativity bias, why this is important to just acknowledge that it exists within all of us, is because it goes back to this idea that our thoughts and our feelings, while they are real, it doesn't mean they're true. All right. We tend to overemphasize what we perceive as not working or as being a flaw. And so this is one of the ways we can get really stuck in negative emotion is feeling that is being one with the story that we're telling ourselves about how we are failing or how we're not doing a good enough job. The negativity bias works hand in hand with the confirmation bias. This is where we selectively look for examples in our life to confirm what we already believe about ourselves in the world. So if we feel like we're not working hard enough, and then we forget to send an email to somebody before the end of the day, then for us, our mind will gravitate towards that and will say, see, this is confirmation that you're not a good worker or that you're not working good enough. It will completely ignore the other 10, 20, 50, 100 emails that you sent, like, in a short amount of time. So the negativity bias, the tendency we all have to fixate on our flaws, both in ourselves and in the world, and the confirmation bias, the tendency we all have to select empirical data that supports the beliefs that we have. These things work together and often get us stuck in negative emotion. In terms of what I mean by powerful stories, often when we feel most stuck is when our mind is telling us stories that have the most intensity or relevance to us based on our values. So what do I mean by that? If you are somebody who values yourself as it's important to be a good professional, then if you have the thought that I'm failing at my job, this story is going to be very powerful to you because you want to be a good worker. And so you can kind of get drawn into this, I'm not doing enough, or I'm not performing at the level of my coworkers. If one of your stories is that it's important to be a good parent, then you're going to be really at thinking that I'm not spending enough quality time with my kids. So there are certain stories that just by their very nature connect with our core values. And because they connect with our core values, we can get stuck in feeling either inadequate or deficient regarding whatever that particular topic is. And then finally, there's this inner voice within us all that is kind of like there to judge us. And it's basically saying, how am I doing? And when you notice that question, how am I doing, that inner voice, it almost always has some really high standard that you are failing to meet. And so that inner voice arises, how am I doing? And then almost immediately there's a sense of a feeling of not doing enough or coming up short or failing. And so all these things is our negativity bias as human beings, our confirmation bias as human beings, the fact that we have certain core beliefs that we have been telling ourselves for many, many years, and that we have this kind of inner dialogue that tends to judge us. This all can lead to getting stuck in either stress or anxiety or depression or grief or shame. And so the first way out is just to name it, to identify it, name it to tame it. Because once you become aware of what you're experiencing, you can say, oh, I know what this is. This is feeling not good enough. Or I know what this is. This is thinking I'm going to fail. Or I know what this is. This is me feeling like I'm not a good enough parent. Or I don't dedicate enough. I'm not as good as my coworkers. Once you name it, right in that very moment, it comes to your conscious awareness and it loses some of its power. Because once again, you can become aware, I know what this is. This is a story. This is a thought. This is something I've been telling myself for a very long time. This is something that I've felt in my body for a very long time. This is not foreign to me. And so by naming it, suddenly you are able to create some space between you and this thought and this feeling. You don't have to be one with that thought and feeling. All right, so once we name it, once we identify what's going on with me, okay, I feel like I'm failing, or I feel like there's not enough time in the world, or not enough time in the day, or I feel like I'm, not a good enough parent, or I'm acting selfish, or I need to be more patient. Once you identify what's present with you, then you can become curious about it. And so when I say become curious about it, it's almost like you were looking at something outside of yourself. Like, what is this really about? And so I think there's a couple frameworks that can be helpful when you become curious about yourself and the world. First of all, it's important to acknowledge that we all have some core fears. We all fear death. We all fear being rejected. We all fear failure. We all fear being alone. We all fear loss of control. These are some core fears. So one of the ways you can become curious about your experience is saying, is it one of these core fears? This fear of being rejected. One of the ones I didn't use is this fear that we're not a good person, right? So everybody has times when they doubt, am I a good person? And so in being able to say, okay, I know what this is. This is one of those core fears. This is what all human beings experience. A loss of control. Fear of the unknown is another one. Before we went into this PowerPoint, several people basically identified that the world feels like it's in a state of chaos. That speaks to fear of the unknown. So become curious about what your experience is and see, does it connect to one of the core human fears that we all hold? Then you can also ask yourself, what are you believing right now? When you feel stuck in emotion, whether it's sadness or despair or feelings of shame and inadequacy, ask yourself, what's the story, or what are you believing right now? And the belief may be that I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy of love, or that I'm not a good parent, or I don't work hard enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not attractive enough. But it's important to understand, like, what is it that you are believing right now? And then to ask yourself, is this true? That's one way, that's one thing to do to create some space and to become curious. Is this true? If you're having the thought that I am not a good worker, you can ask yourself, is this true? And you can think, well, all right, let me think about, is work important to me? Yes. Do I spend a lot of time working? Yes. Do I give it my best effort? Yes. Well, then the belief that I'm not a good worker is probably not true. I wish that you only had to do that once, but this is a life project. This is something you have to keep coming back to. Another question you can ask yourself is, what if I don't believe this? You know, what if I don't believe this? That I can have the thought that I'm not a good parent, I'm not spending enough time with my child. Or I can have the thought that my child is getting bad grades in school and that means I'm not a good parent. All right. If you have those thoughts, you can ask yourself, what if I don't believe this? Then who am I when I let go of this? So these are ways to become curious about your experience. When you ask yourself these questions, when you identify what you're feeling, you can then move on to nurturing yourself, to giving yourself some kindness, to recognize, you know what, every parent feels like they're not doing a good enough job. Or the fact that I feel like I'm not a good parent because my child got a bad grade, it really shows how much I care about my child. Within the professional world, you could say everybody is constantly looking at their coworkers, or most people are working at, I'll put it this way, most people are looking at their coworkers saying, what do they think that I'm not, do they value me? Do they respect me? Do they think I'm a hard worker? I'm not alone in this experience. This is part of being human. And the truth is that I do put a lot of work and a lot of effort into work. So this is where you can give yourself some kindness. You can nurture yourself. You can also reach out to somebody, who knows you well. And I really encourage you to reach out to someone that is not dismissive, that is able to be present with you. But you can just say to them, I've been really, really worried about my capacity as a parent. And they can be there with you and say, sometimes you want to hear you're a great parent, but sometimes you just want somebody there to listen to you. Other ways to respond to difficult emotions. This is where we're going to do a couple different activities here. And I'm actually going to jump down to the third bullet point on the slide, because then I'm going to come back to a couple activities after that. When you're experiencing difficult emotions, what do I mean by communicating mindfully? It's acknowledging what you're feeling when you're feeling it, okay? And it's using your I language. And it's also deciding for your, how do I want to respond? Do I want to communicate this? So let me give you an example of, this is actually something that was shared with me from one of my past clients. This client, for the longest time, would never communicate her feelings or her experiences because she was afraid that if she expressed herself, that people would get mad at her, or they would reject her, or they would dismiss her. So for the longest time, she would never express herself. But as she started to practice kind of this awareness she was feeling, as she started to practice, communication around what she was feeling, then there was this time where a coworker did something that bothered her. And she basically said, hey, that bothers me. Can you please not do that, right? And in that moment, that coworker responded, in the grand scheme of things, what does this really matter? And my client said, you're right. In the grand scheme of things, this probably doesn't matter. But in this moment, it bothers me. And I only live in this moment. And when she said that to her coworker suddenly opened up and said, recognize, oh, okay, well, let me remedy this. So this idea that often what happens when there's conflict within a work setting is that people will interpret it and they will hold on to it, and it will build or grow into resentment, or it will be expressed in passive aggressive ways. But if you can learn to express, your feelings by using your eye language in the moment, and you can do it in a way that you can do it where you don't criticize the other person, you don't attack their character. Often within both personal and professional environments, people can hear that. So that's the idea of communicating mindfully. These other two approaches, the first one is find your resource anchor. And what do I mean by this? I'm taking this from Tara Brach, who's a psychologist who wrote a book, Radical Compassion. It's that you think about, where is my safe place? Where do I feel accepted? Where do I feel like I belong? And so I'm going to give like 30 seconds right now for everyone just to sit here and think to themselves. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable, but ask yourself, where, who accepts me? Who cares about me? Where do I belong? And see if you can bring to your mind a person or a place. It might be a community or an activity. It might be your pet. It might be that wonderful feeling when you open the door and your dog goes crazy. But think of a moment, situation, a community, a person where you feel like you belong. Now, if you were not able to think of someone right now, that's okay. You can come back to this exercise later if you want to try it. But if you have thought of somebody or a situation where you feel at home, where you feel safe, think of this as your anchor. When there are times where you feel like overwhelmed, where you feel like you can't take anymore, you can't handle anymore, what's most important is to feel safe in those times, to come home. And you can call up this image, this feeling of acceptance, of care, of kindness, tenderness. You can bring this to your mind and say, I'm going to be present with this because this is what I need to feel right now. So this is a practice that you can, the more you do it, the more that it becomes an internal resource to you when you're experiencing really extreme stress or you're feeling overwhelmed by emotion. Another technique is to identify what is nurturing to you, particularly in terms of nurturing touch. There's two places that I really want to emphasize. One is just, if you're willing to put your hand on your belly right now, just let it rest across your belly button. This feeling of your hand on your belly for many people is calming and nurturing. Even allowing your belly to expand with your breath and to constrict. To expand and to constrict. That touch right there can be very calming and very grounding when your emotions are really feeling intense. In addition to your hand on your belly, you can try putting your hand on your heart. And so it's important that when you are kind of bringing awareness to what your emotions are, what you're feeling and thinking, what your body's experiencing, it's important to connect with your body. So putting your hand on your heart is a way to also saying, I care. I'm here, I'm present. These simple touches, they can be done anytime or as often as needed throughout the day. And if you're about to go into a difficult work meeting or you're anticipating there may be some interpersonal conflict, allowing yourself to kind of check in with what you're feeling, to give yourself some nurturing touch. The idea of compassionate breathing would be that you find a space where it feels calm and nurturing to you and safe. For me, it's often my belly, so I'll put my hand on my belly. And then I'll just take, maybe it could be as little as 2 minutes, it could be as much as 10 minutes. And I'll just close my eyes with my hand on my belly. And I'll just follow my breath. And I'll think to myself, breathing in for me and breathing out for the world. This helps me to ground myself and to come into any kind of interpersonal work interaction with an open mind, open heart. So those are some practical tips. I'm trying to think. Here is our slide that just basically explains the services that we offer in Work Plus Life connections in the Office of Work Life. Every UK staff and faculty is entitled to 5 free counseling sessions per fiscal year. This also is a benefit available to their dependents, their spouses, their children. I would encourage anyone that's experiencing some difficulty, which I think in the time of a pandemic and lots of social unrest, many of us, maybe even the majority of us, are experiencing some discomfort, to access these resources. I hope that this presentation on emotional health and embracing the idea that you're okay even when everything is not okay, that this has been helpful to you. And I will now conclude this.